The Bank of Canada is issuing a warning to Canadians that housing prices will not continue to go up at the levels that they're going up. It is unsustainable, and that at some point interest rates are going to increase. And that has a lot of Canadians feeling anxious, and perhaps maybe you're feeling anxious. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the messaging from Tiff Macklem of the Bank of Canada last week, and also what you can do to prepare for the eventual slowdown in housing prices and the eventual increase in interest rates. But before we get into that, I've done you the favor of making this video. Please do me the favor of hitting that subscribe button and hitting that notification bell and the like button so more people like you can see this video. And keep in mind that we're going to be giving away $5,000 to one lucky subscriber when we hit 25,000 subscribers. I sincerely hope it's going to be you, but the only way to win is to subscribe to this channel. So go ahead, click that subscribe button. It's free, it's easy, and it's definitely worth it. The definitive guide on how to manage your credit, product, penalty, price in that order. It's never been more important to get your mortgage right. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's discuss Tiff Macklem's warning to Canadians that housing prices are not going to continue to increase forever, and that interest rates are bound to go up at some point. And here's the news on it. BNN Bloomberg, the headline is Bank of Canada warns home buyers that rates will eventually rise. And that is true. Eventually, at some point, interest rates are going to rise. But I have to wonder, I have to think, does Tiff Macklem sit at home at night, lying in bed, and wonder if he can actually increase interest rates at some point in the future? Because as an economist, he knows how hard it becomes to increase interest rates over time. But at the end of the day, he has to do something to help steer the Canadian housing market away from this insane exuberance that is leading to housing prices that are increasing across Canada. So I have to think that there's a little bit more to this messaging than just interest rates will go up. I think it's something to do with the fact that you have to, as the governor of the Bank of Canada, you have to help real estate not get super crazy. And here's the thing is, when you think about the messaging and you think about rule changes to the stress tests, which are coming out June 1st, if you start to understand the psychology of why they're making these announcements, if you start to understand the psychology of the messaging, then you start to see really what's underlying behind the messaging. And what we're seeing right now is we're seeing one OSFI, which is the regulator that manages the financial institutions, who reports to the federal finance minister. And you're seeing the federal finance minister say that we're going to increase the stress test rates so that if interest rates do start to increase, that Canadians have qualified at a higher rate and therefore, in theory, will be able to manage their payments. But at the same time, you've got this scenario where the Bank of Canada in this report came out and said, we're getting a little bit worried about the fact that the amount of debt to incomes is going up substantially. And of course it's going up substantially because you've got lower interest rates, which means lower debt servicing costs, which means the ability to carry more debt by normal qualifying standards. So really, I think that as the government, as the Bank of Canada governor, you have to sit there and think, okay, how do we cool this market without increasing interest rates and potentially having a major impact on the recovery, and also having a major cooling effect on the rest of the economy, and more precisely having a drastic cooling effect on the economy, because if they were to increase interest rates earlier than the rest of the developed nations in the world, well, it's going to lead to an increased Canadian dollar and therefore a further slowdown in our economy. So I have to think that at the end of the day, you've got a Bank of Canada governor and a government who's going, how do we put the brakes on this housing market without crashing it, but also without encouraging it to speed up and take away the positive impacts it's having on the economy. I don't envy the position that they're in, because as an economist, we know that when interest rates get this low, you really start to lose control. And when you start to lose control, really it is just the market that is going to dictate what happens. So what's really interesting is that the Bank of Canada came out with their annual financial system review last week, and they looked at the threats to the Canadian economy. And lo and behold, no surprise here, the Canadian housing market is definitely one that is at risk, especially when you consider that the primary way to cool this real estate market is going to be increasing interest rates. And that may not happen. And if it does, it means it's likely that there's massive amounts of inflation, and an increase to interest rates could essentially put borrowers at a whole in a scenario where they are not able to afford their homes, and therefore it leads to a crash in the housing market and therefore further stress and vulnerability in the Canadian economy as a whole. So, it's a really interesting catch-22 that the Bank of Canada is in, because they are now in a situation where if they raise interest rates, when they start to raise interest rates, it's going to put real estate in jeopardy. Real estate can't be put into jeopardy right now, or it could have devastating effects on the economy because it's a driver of the economy. And it's just this really interesting situation that as a generation, as multiple generations, we haven't really seen this since the 1920s or 1930s. The Canadian economy put in this sort of situation. So it's like, how do you cool the economy? Well, you message that you need to be careful. And when you message that you need to be careful, hopefully Canadians start to be careful. But what's really interesting, and I pulled one chart out of the financial system review here, was this chart. And this is the home price exuberance index. And what the home price exuberance index is it measures sort of the sentiment in the economy and the sentiment in the housing market. And basically there's two types of people in the housing market. There are people that think that housing prices are going to stay in line with the fundamentals. And then when things get crazy, there are people that think that the housing market is going to continue to go up in value beyond what the fundamentals should indicate. So when we talk about the fundamentals, when you see a decrease in interest rates, what you should expect is that housing prices will go up because people can borrow more. But what ends up happening is you get this excitement in the market that we're seeing in different markets right now, and people start to believe that housing prices will continue to go up and up and up and up beyond what is reasonable. And this is what happened in 2007, 2008 in the US. Everyone expected that housing prices would continue to go up forever. Lending practices got loose, and that's what led to the financial meltdown. And what's really interesting is this chart that I've got up on my screen right now, and this is their home price exuberance index, and it's basically done as a heat map. And what you can see is you can see the areas of the country where they believe that housing price exuberance is above and beyond what it should be. And basically, if you go and you take a look at this section here, that's where all the exuberance is. And this is consistent with what we're seeing, especially if you go and you read the YouTube comments on this channel, you can see that people in the Greater Toronto area, the Hamilton area, the Ottawa and the Montreal area are all experiencing crazy markets with multiple offers, 30 or 40 bids on a single house, $40,000 to $50,000 to $100,000 over list price for sales. And, this is what I think the Bank of Canada and the federal government is worried about. And this is why we're seeing that increase in the stress test, and we're seeing the warning from the Bank of Canada. And if you're in these markets, you really need to be careful. If you're in the rest of the markets in Canada, I think we have a little bit of a seller's market for sure, but we don't have the belief that housing prices are going to go up continually and indefinitely, and therefore people aren't jumping into the market when they shouldn't be. So let's talk about that for a second, because the whole premise of this particular video is how do you prepare and how do you make sure that you're set up just in case housing prices come down or in case the market starts to correct or starts to collapse. Well, there's a few things that I recommend. First and foremost, if you're in one of these four markets, take another look here. If you're in Greater Toronto area, if you're in Hamilton, if you're in Ottawa, if you're in Montreal, one of these four markets here, be very careful about getting into bidding wars right now. In fact, I would say as a general rule, you should probably be avoiding bidding wars altogether. Just wait until the market cools out, because what these red lines mean is it means that people are overbuying and that could lead to a bigger correction or bigger issues in those markets. So I would definitely steer clear of those. The other thing you need to consider if you're getting into the housing market is your mortgage, or if you've got a mortgage coming up for renewal, you need to consider it as well, because the next 5 years is going to be all about flexibility. We learned this from the years after 2009, leading up to basically 2015, 2016. There was infinite numbers of opportunities to save money if you were in a scenario where you had flexibility. There was also a lot of opportunities to save money if you were selling and you didn't have to give a bunch of equity back to the bank in the form of a penalty. So what we're recommending for people is you want the most flexible mortgages that you can get. Now, I know that mortgages and interest rates and all of these things are really difficult to understand in a lot of cases. We have a course on this that's called Secrets to Getting the Lowest Interest Rates that runs through in more detail everything I'm about to talk about. But just know that you can go there and you can get all of the best information for really, really cheaply. But when I talk about interest rates and I talk about flexibility, what I'm talking about is not getting locked into a fixed rate mortgage, not getting locked into a mortgage where the bank gets to charge you a higher rate in the beginning, where they get to charge you a higher rate to get out of the mortgage in a form of a penalty, and where you have less flexibility because of the penalties. And think about this. Think about how crazy this is. We get into these 5-year fixed mortgages that cost us more to get out of. And the reason they cost us more to get out of is because they're like, oh, well, if I'm going to let you out of this mortgage and you're paying 2.79 and I can only lend out the money for 1.99, well, that makes it so that it's more difficult for me to lend out the money, and therefore you're going to have to pay me that difference. And then they turn around and they go and lend it out on another 5-year mortgage at a higher rate anyways, and they make a little bit of extra profit on the fact that you paid the penalty, and a little bit of extra profit because you've made up for any losses that they had plus paid them that little bit extra. So, when it comes to getting a mortgage right now and being prepared, that penalty is going to be the thing that has the most potential to hurt people down the road. And what you need to do is you need to make sure that you've got the opportunity to sell your house if you need to, without giving a whole bunch of your equity back to the bank. And the only way to do that is by having a variable rate mortgage that has a 3-month interest penalty, and that basically has the ability for you to pay the penalty and sell the house and not give all of your equity back to the bank, because that's going to be the single biggest factor for people if the housing markets in these markets correct, is they're going to get underwater on how much equity that they have. And then when they have to go and pay a penalty on top of that, they may not be able to sell their houses because they owe more than what the house is worth. So in addition to that, you want to make sure you have that flexibility, because as interest rates move around, and I have a feeling they're going to go up and down and up and down and up and down for the next few years, there may be future opportunities to get lower interest rates too, which is again why you want to be in that variable. So, at the end of the day, the Bank of Canada is warning Canadians, and I'm warning Canadians as well. And what I'm saying is this, is you need to make sure that you aren't getting caught up in the hype. Markets fluctuate, markets get crazy. If you go back and you take a look at previous years back here, what you see is these market hypes. And this is actually really interesting because they've given us a graph for this. These crazy markets typically only last for about a year at a time, sometimes a little bit more if you look at Winnipeg back in the 90s, but typically these crazy markets only last for about a year at a time. So there is going to be an opportunity for you to buy again. There is going to be an opportunity for you to purchase at a lower price, or maybe not in such a crazy market. So just stay out of the craziness unless you absolutely have to. Don't write a condition-free offer unless you have multiple backup plans, and make sure that the mortgages that you are getting do have the flexibility to allow you to cope with whatever happens in the future. So if you found this video useful, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Please hit that like button so more people like you can see this video. And don't forget about our race to 25,000 subscribers, where we're going to give $5,000 to one lucky Canadian just for subscribing to this channel. It's free, it's easy, it's definitely worth it, and we'll see you on the next video. Cheers.